and you can let people into the waiting room. Is that okay, Randy? Randy, I'm making you co-host, and you can let people into the room. Give me a here, Randy.
Sorry about that. I just have over 30 seconds. What did you ask me to do? You want me to co-host and let people in?
Please.
Sure.
Okay, thanks so much.
Of course.
Okay, let's get to it. Hi, Stephen. Nice to see you too. You had some good questions last week. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so we discussed in last week that in 1200 BCE, Joshua came into the promised land. I hear a mute, so Randy, you can mute yourself. It was in 1200 BCE, and that's when he came into the land. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a minute. I want you guys to see what I'm seeing here. Okay, so we're going to skip this for a moment. The map, we're going to come over here, and you see there Joshua. This was 1200 BCE. So as we explained in last class, Zali, if you're here, if you can come here, Zali Schwartz. In last class, we discussed how the first column over here, if you see my mouse, Joshua reigned for 28 years, and that's the shady box. Othniel is the first judge. He reigned for 40 years. And there you see, Sally, this is just a station for identification. How do I get the mouse where people can see my mouse going? See, I see my mouse, but is there something?
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, you can see the mouse? Okay, fine.
Yeah, I see too.
Okay, fine. Very good. Okay, very good. Good.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
You can also,
Okay. And Ehud is another judge. He reigned for 80 years, and you see that shaded box. And that is how we continue to grow these shady boxes. And we're moving right above, let's say, as an example, the fourth row, where it says Shamgar. The third row, which says Ehud. He reigned from the year 2560, and 80 years will take you basically to the year 2640 from creation. So basically 2480, this first number, 2480, from creation, when Joshua entered the promised land, was 1200 BCE. Just for you to work your math over there, okay? Okay, that's it for now. I'm going to stop the share. We'll get back to that chart a little bit later. So the first order of business, just a quick 5-minute recap from last week, is Joshua enters the promised land. The Jordan River is split. I want to do one more thing because I want to share the map. So give me a second. I'm going to share the map with you. Okay, this is the Jordan River, guys. You see that blue line where my mouse is going down. You see the River of Jordan. So on this side is one side, this is called Jordan. And on this side is the land of Israel, the promised land. And as we explained, 2.5 tribes was Transjordan, was not on the side of Israel. And that's because Manasseh, which is this very large yellow swath, it was a very large tribe. So half of their tribe was in the land of Israel, and half of it was on the other side of the Jordan River. And of course, the two other tribes were Gad and Reuven. And again, they had permission from Moses and of course, from Joshua to enter the land of Israel with all the other tribes, conquer the land. And when they finished conquering, they went back to Transjordan to settle and live happily ever after. So I like this map a little bit more because it's more distinct with the tribes and of course, the Jordan River. Now, their first place where they entered the land of Israel, and of course you have this map, hopefully maybe even a printout for yourself, is Gilgal. So you don't have to look at the screen, but Gilgal was that first order of business where they came into the land of Israel. And then they traveled from Gilgal to this area. Somewhere in this area was Mount Ebal and Har Gerizim, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. This is where they brought those 12 stones from the riverbed of the Jordan River. They wrote the entire Torah on it. Like we explained, there are different commentators. Some say it was just the 613 commandments. Some commentators say, no, they did the whole Torah. And some commentators say they did the Torah in 70 languages. But either way, they traveled that first day from Gilgal to this area. And what happened at the site of Mount Ebal at Mount Gerizim? So I'm going to go to the next page. This is the picture where you have the ark. These are the priests holding the ark, and you have 6 tribes by Mount Ebal. That's hundreds of thousands of Jews. And you have Mount Gerizim on the other side, where you have hundreds of thousands of Jews. So you have 6 tribes on each side. So it's called the blessings and the curses at Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, which is quite a few miles distance from Gilgal. And this is where Joshua basically gave his first testament, like Moses did at Mount Sinai 40 years prior. So this is now Joshua telling the people, cursed be the Jews if they sin and they have idol worship. Cursed be the Jews if they desecrate the Sabbath. And everyone would have to say, Amen, Amen. And then Joshua said, blessed be the Jews who would keep the Sabbath. Blessed be the Jews who would keep in the belief of one God, and so on and so forth. So that's what happened on that first day. I'm just going to go to the next page, which you have. And here it actually lists for you which 6 tribes were on one side and which 6 tribes were on the other side. And of course, you have the ark in the middle. The priests or Kohanim were holding the ark. And of course, the elders of the Levites, which were not part of any tribe, were surrounding them on the floor of this great site. So I'm going back, scrolling up to the map. So again, they came into Gilgal right after the Jordan River. They went to this area at Mount Ebal and Gerizim. They came back to Gilgal. This is where they were told to circumcise their boys, their males, because they didn't do it in the desert. And thanks, Randy. And then this is Jericho. This was the first attack that the Jewish people did to conquer the land of Israel. They didn't do the whole land. This was just the city of Jericho. So what happened at Jericho? So basically God told Joshua, prepare the people, and you're going to surround this entire city. Think a city like, I don't know, Burbank or something. It's a nice large city, not as big as Los Angeles, but a big city. And this city, Jericho, was the strongest city and the largest city in all of Israel. So Joshua knew if they conquered this city of Jericho, which he had no doubt, all the other kings and enemy nations would respect the Jewish people. And there was no failing here. So God tells Joshua, I want you to take the Jewish people and I want you to surround the walls of Jericho one time. And I want you to do this for 6 days. Every day you're going to surround the walls of Jericho. And on the 7th day, you're going to surround the walls of Jericho 7 times. And you're going to take on the 7th day, when you surround the walls of Jericho 7 times, you're going to take the shofars with you, and the priests are going to blow the shofars. And you're also going to take the ark, this beautiful holy ark. And after you do this 7 times, the walls are going to come tumbling down, and that's what happened. It's interesting to note that right before he made this move, Joshua, an angel, it's a very obscure a few verses in Joshua, very vague, but it does say there that an angel came to Joshua with a sword in his hand. And Joshua said, are you with me or are you against me? And the person said, I'm an angel of God, a messenger of God. This is a holy place because I'm standing here. And Joshua, you better take off your shoes because this is holy ground. Kind of like Moses in front of the burning bush. And this angel reprimanded Joshua and said, you came into the land of Israel, you had all these miracles, and you're kratzing around, you're not studying Torah, you're not bringing sacrifices, you're just sort of waiting for God to give you the order. I'm telling you that the only way you're going to be successful ever is if you study the Torah and do the sacrifices and so forth. Okay, so that's just a little exchange that happened between the angel and Joshua. Then you have the 7 days, and they rocked and rolled, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. Okay, that was the first order of business. The following chapter in Joshua discusses the second attack. Oh, and as I mentioned last week, and that this will finish the recap of last week, that Rachav, who was this woman running this brothel or a hotel, was promised by Joshua's two spies that the Jewish people are not going to kill her, Rachav, and any of her family in this town. And that's what happened. So the Jewish people ransacked this entire city, and they killed all the people there. But Rachav and her family, they did not kill, because again, she put that string around their house, around her children's homes. And again, this is where we started this business with the red string for protection. Okay, the second attack happened to a city called Ai, A-I, and Joshua failed. So his second attempt to attack an enemy nation failed miserably. And 36 Jews were killed. This is also discussed in Joshua. What happened? Joshua found out that there was an individual in the city of Ai who was hiding some statutes, some idols that that they took as booty from the city of Jericho right before it. And this caused God, of course, a lot of anger. And we will see throughout the course of the prophets of over hundreds and hundreds of years, when the Jews followed the enemies, the non-Jewish nations of having idol worship and having statutes, things went down for them. And when they believed in monotheism, things were very good for them. And we will see these episodes many times. The first episode we see it is when they try to attack the city of Ai. In any case, they finally did a lottery, and they kept on narrowing down who's the tribe and who's the family and who's the person that's hiding the statue in their tent. It was a major scene, and they found the person. He repented. I believe actually he was killed, but either way, now Joshua made a second attempt to destroy this enemy city of Ai, A-I. And of course, he was very successful. They had 30,000. Joshua, the book of Joshua says there was 30,000 Jews on one side of the city of Ai, 5,000 on the other. They made an ambush. And Joshua is very detailed into, this book of Joshua is very detailed of, how many fights there were, how many soldiers were fighting in every single town.
If I may ask, how many did you say died originally in the city of Ai, of Jews?
36.
36.
Yep.
How do the rabbis understand it that the mistakes of one person, the whole nation's held accountable for the mistakes that one person took on?
Yeah, that's a very good question, by the way, Alan.
If you don't want to answer it, it's okay. I don't want to distract
No,
you.
no. I think it's a very good question. Sometimes I don't have an answer, but sometimes the people that died were supposed to die, but they weren't supposed to die in a public state. So this is the way God kills them. There's something called karet, which is one of the ways where God executes somebody, not people, not a court system. And that's how sometimes we see when many Jewish people were killed. I'm not talking about modern days. Everything we're discussing is old-fashioned history between prophets and kings. I'm not saying, God forbid, when someone dies today in 2021, we're saying, oh yeah, he deserved to die. Actually, it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe who was very opposed to people when they came to him and said certain bad catastrophes happened, whether it was in the land of Israel or in Germany or and so on and so forth. And they would say, it must be the Jewish people were sunken in idol worship, just like what happened by the town of Ai, and just like what happened. And they start quoting different cities throughout the course of the history of the prophets in the books of the Torah. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said very clear, unequivocally, that none of the Jewish people today are sinners like the old days where the Jewish people saw God and saw the miracles of the Jordan River splitting and the Dead Sea splitting and Mount Sinai and so forth. Nor today do we have prophets like there was once upon a time, like Joshua. So thus we're unable to state as Jewish religious individuals that anyone gets hurt or injured or dies because of anyone's sins. But thanks for bringing that up. And as you see my mouse over here to the left side of Gilgal is that town of Ai, A-I. Okay, if you see it right there, I'm just blowing it up. And there it is where I'm circling AI. Okay. Okay, thanks, Alan. You can go back and mute yourself if you can. After he destroyed the city of Jericho, this is the city of Jericho, Joshua composes a blessing, and we have that blessing till today. We all know after we eat bread, we all sing in summer day camp, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. That paragraph was composed by Moses, because that's, if you read the English during that paragraph, it's all about God providing sustenance for the Jewish people, which is referring to the manna in the 40 years of the desert. But now that the Jewish people don't have the manna, and Joshua with hundreds of thousands of Jews are now conquering the land, and God is blessing the land of Israel and giving the land of Israel to the Jewish people, he composes the second paragraph of the Birchat Hamazon, of the grace after meals, which is No delecha Adonai Eloheinu al shinchalta lavos Eretz Chemda Tova, which is the land, which is choice, the choicest of land, which is beautiful and good. And that whole paragraph is focusing on the land that God gave us. So it was Joshua that composed that second paragraph. So till today, thousands of years later, we still have it. Something I didn't mention earlier is how indeed do I, Mendel Schwartz, know that the book of Joshua is not written by, let's say, I don't know, Joseph Flavius or the CEOs of Google? Because the book of Joshua was written by Joshua himself. Only the last sentence of the book of Joshua, after 20 chapters, where it states that he died at the year 110 years old, only that was inserted by Samuel the priest many years later. But up until that point, Joshua himself wrote in the book of Joshua that he wrote it, and it states, and he put the book before he died under the stone by the tabernacle. So every single book of the prophets, which is Joshua, and the next book is the volume called Judges, was written by the priests or the judges of that time like a diary. And it was Samuel who comes onto the scene 350 years after Joshua, who started to compile the diaries and the histories of all those judges for the second volume, which is called the Judges. But the first volume, which we're discussing now, called Joshua, was actually written by Joshua himself. Okay, moving right along. After he finishes, God then tells Joshua, you have to now take out the 7 nations. The 7 nations that are established in the land of Israel that don't belong there. And here they are, the top right, the Arameans, Ammon, the Moabites, Amalek on the bottom left, the Philistines. You see where my arrow is? To the left of it is Gaza. That Gaza is an old map, but it's still there. In the book of Joshua and the Judges, it's not called Gaza, it's called Aza, without a G. But in English, they call it Gaza. Like in the books of our prophets, it's called Yerushalayim, but we call it Jerusalem. It's an English word for it. So Aza and Gaza is the same. And these are the 7 nations on the outskirts here, the Moabites and so forth, that we had to kill. There was a Hittite is also there, but I don't see Hittite on this map. In any case, 6 out of the 7 nations said, the heck with you, Joshua, we're going to fight you guys. And indeed, it took Joshua 7 years to fight these kings and these nations. In total, there were 31 kings. It's mentioned, I believe, in chapter 12, or hold on, in chapter 12, the 31 kings that were living in the land of Israel at the time were all killed and destroyed by Joshua, but they represented from 7 large nations. So one of the nations left Israel and went to Africa, and the 6 remaining fought. They either had to surrender and convert to Judaism, basically, i.e., believe in one God, or they had to leave the country, or they were going to fight. So like I said, the one nation left, the other 6 nations said we're going to fight. And there was a small group of people from the Hittite nation. And this is important to remember because this episode will keep on haunting the Jewish people 1,000 years later. There was a group called the Gibeonites. In Hebrew, it's Givon. In English, it's the Gibeonites. And this group of the Gibeonites basically did a trick move. They dressed up like old peddlers, and they told Joshua, a little bit, we discussed this in last class, but I'm articulating this a little bit more because, again, this is going to keep on hounding us all the way through King Solomon and King David and so forth, which is many years from now. So these Gibeonites basically dressed up like, gypsies, Bedouins from another country. They pretended they're from Africa with old stale bread and their clothes were tattered and muddy. And they told Joshua, we're just hanging out in this land of Israel. We love you. We like you. We want to be your servants. And leave us alone. We're into idol worship, but we're not part of those 7 nations that you need to kill. And Joshua said, how do you know? How should I know that you're not part of the nations? Maybe you're tricking me. They said, no, I promise. We love you, Joshua. We love God. We'll be your servants. We're people from another country from Africa. So Joshua made a pact with them, and said, I'll let you live peacefully as you're passing through this country. And they said, great. And of course, a few days later, they settled in their land in Israel. And word came out that Joshua made peace with the Gibeonites, which was part of the Hittite nation. And they were tricked. Joshua said, what did you do to me? You're part of the 6 remaining nations that I have to kill and destroy, or you have to leave the country. They said, no, we're not leaving the country. You made a deal with us. You made peace. Anyway, Joshua said, I'll let you stay in the land of Israel because I made a deal with you. I made a pact. I'm not going to go back on my promise. But you will be our servants, and you will be our water carriers, and you'll be our wood choppers, and you're going to work for us hard. And that's the way it remained. A few chapters later in Joshua, there were 5 kings from Hebron, not Jewish kings, that decided to destroy this Gibeonite tribe that basically had this alliance with the Jewish people. And these 5 kings came to Hebron to destroy the Gibeonite, I wouldn't call them nation, the Gibeonite tribe. And basically they sent scouts to Joshua and said, please save us from these 5 kings. And Joshua had no choice but to bring his army to save the Gibeonites, who are not Jewish people, from the 5 kings. This fight happened on a Friday afternoon. This is the famous story where Joshua did not want to fight on Shabbat, and thus he ordered the sun to stand still so that there shouldn't be sunset. Shabbat should not begin. And after a few hours later on Shabbat, but it really wasn't Shabbat because the sun didn't set, Joshua and the Jewish people were able to kill the 5 kings and their people. And of course, the commentators are up in arms. Why would God?
Who didn't want to fight?
Huh?
Who didn't they want to fight on Shabbos?
They didn't want to fight the Gibeonites. They didn't want to fight the 5 kings who were killing the Gibeonites.
Okay.
But Joshua made a pact with the Gibeonites that he will protect them and save them. So he had no choice but to come to their aid. But because it was Shabbat, and someone put on the chat before, how can they fight on Shabbat when it came to Jericho? Because that was a commandment from God himself. So if God says to keep the Shabbat, and the same God says, I want you to fight on Shabbat, so then you fight on Shabbat, even if it's on Shabbat. So that's why they went and fought in Jericho on Shabbat. But since the fight for the Gibeonites was not an order from God, this was Joshua's blunder of making a pact with non-Jewish people, so he couldn't desecrate the Shabbat. So as a result, he had to make this miracle and make the sun stay in the sky and not set. Good. Any questions before I continue?
Yeah, I have a question. You said the Gibeonites were idol worshippers, right?
Yeah. So they changed some of their ways, but not completely.
But he allowed idol worshippers in the land of Israel, basically.
He got tricked. Correct.
Oh, so he did not think they were idol worshippers, basically.
He knew they were idol worshippers, but he didn't think they were from the land of Israel.
Yeah,
he thought they were from a foreign country.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But how could he let idol worshippers in the land? That's what I don't understand.
Because God only ordered Joshua, only the idol worshippers as part of those 7 nations, the Canaanites,
I
the
see.
Amalekites.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Very good. Now in chapter 20, we finished basically the book of Joshua, which is after the 7 years of fighting that Joshua did. And then he divided the land amongst the 7 nations. Let's share the screen for a minute just to look at the map one more time. So you see here this beautiful map. I kind of like it. And you see the tribes all over the place. So it took him 7 years to fight the nations, 7 years to divide the land. And then he dies at the age of 110. When he dies, he's buried in his own tribe of Ephraim. This is where Joshua comes from the tribe of Ephraim, which, as you see, I was there. And the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is moved now for the first time from Gilgal, where they arrived, into the land of Israel, and is moved. I'm just going to zoom up a little bit. And it moved to Shiloh. So for 14 years, from when the Jews came in, the tabernacle, which was this very temporary looking tabernacle, which was the same tabernacle with the ark inside, that was a tabernacle for 40 years in the desert. Once 40 years later, right before Joshua died, it moves to Shiloh. Here already it became more of a permanent tabernacle, with concrete, with a rooftop, not with curtains at the top. And it's here in Shiloh where Joshua buries his book of Joshua under a stone, which of course wasn't buried to be buried. It was just a safekeeping, which of course I'm sure many other people made copies, including the following judges, and of course Samuel the prophet himself that comes onto the scene a little bit later. Give me 1 minute. I'm just going to close the door. Now, while the tabernacle was in Gilgal for 14 years, the Jewish people were able to bring sacrifices to God on their miniature altars anywhere they wanted in the land of Israel. This was an exemption because Israel was not established yet. God wanted them to still bring sacrifices. In Gilgal, it was a temporary tabernacle. The Jews are being dispersed all over the place, including on this side of Israel, in Jordan. But once it was established in Shiloh, it became a prohibition to bring a sacrifice anywhere in the land of Israel unless you were in Shiloh at that tabernacle. Okay, I'm just pointing that out to you. The tabernacle stood in Shiloh for 369 years. Yep, Maimonides brings that number as well, 369 years. The tabernacle eventually was sacked. The ark was lost right before the times of King Saul. And the ark was a little bit on the move, which we'll discuss later in different places in Israel. And then finally, it will be established in Jerusalem in the times of King Solomon. Actually, it was King David that actually brought it to Jerusalem, so I take that back. Just that the temple wasn't built then, but the tabernacle, not the tabernacle, but the ark. Once in Shiloh, the tabernacle was sacked, there was no more tabernacle. We never saw the tabernacle again after it was destroyed in Shiloh. The only thing we had was not the tabernacle, but we had the ark, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that ark was on the move because it was lost, it was captured, which we'll discuss a little bit later, but eventually it found itself in Jerusalem. Okay, let's discuss this map a little bit more.
If I may ask one question, is there a reason they moved it? It was Shiloh was chosen was through prophecy. How did they choose Shiloh?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, good enough.
There must be some happenings that happened in Shiloh where God decided to bring it there, but that's a good question. I'll look into that. Okay. During the times of Joshua, we know that basically there was a lottery system where, let's say, the tribe of Judah would pick up a piece of paper, Judah, and then in another basket was 12 sections, 12 portions in the land of Israel and Transjordan. And then he would pick it up and it would say Hebron. It would give the geography of where the geography land of Judah should be. And then Judah got it. And that's how Judah would move to this section. And there was in Joshua, it actually describes to us like Google Maps, what was the dimensions, how many miles from the water from Ashkelon did Judah start into the Dead Sea? Benjamin, it says, to Givon. It actually gives us widths and depths and lengths to Jericho. So this is how we knew, even before the tribes settled their tribal lands, we already knew where the 12 sections and segments on the geography, where these 12 segments were going to be. We just didn't know who was going to get them. So it was the lottery system that got it. And what's interesting is we already had this lottery system with Moses in the times of the desert. So here you had, no one can say, oh, it was a fix. You know, they did the whole lottery system again. Everything worked out exactly. And so this is the beautiful map that we have. Like I explained, 2.5 tribes are in Transjordan. This is Judah. Now, why did Judah get this section of land? As you see here, there's a little town of Hebron. Hebron is the town. Now, Caleb ben Yefuneh, Caleb, was one of the spies that Moses sent out many years earlier, 40 years earlier, to scout out the land of Israel. And we know from the Torah that Joshua was one spy, Caleb was the other, and Caleb went to Hebron to daven, to pray that his fellow spies shouldn't bring back a bad report. So he already had a connection to Hebron, which was in the tribe of Judah. So Caleb, who's now a senior leader of his tribe of Judah, and he says, I want to settle the land of Judah in this swath of land, he got it. And Benjamin was born in Israel. He was the only one of the 12 tribes that were born in Israel. We know that Kever Rachel, Rachel's tomb, is in Jerusalem. We know Rachel died when she gave birth to Benjamin. Everybody else, all the other tribes were born outside of Israel. So it was a no-brainer when the lottery for Benjamin landed right here, because he deserves Israel and, of course, the prized possession of Jerusalem. Now you'll notice the word Jerusalem is going over Judah and Benjamin. So the commentators tell us that Temple Mount and the Holy Temple that King David and later King Solomon built was actually half of the temple was by Benjamin's side and half by Jerusalem. And today we call it West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is this side by Judah, which is closer to Jordan. If you know your current maps, that's Judah. And Benjamin, which is the Jewish side, we call it West Jerusalem, which is Benjamin's side. You see here the Philistines, which we're going to discuss in a few moments. This is Gaza, which we call Aza. Give me a second over here. So there's a lot of commentary. Why did Shimon? What's interesting with the tribe of Shimon was that the tribe of Shimon is actually in the middle of the tribe of Judah. That's why the two tribes, Judah and Shimon, were basically like Siamese twins. They were joined at the hip. Shimon, when anyone was ever attacking Shimon, they basically had to come through the tribe of Judah. Judah was a very strong military tribe. So they were very close, and many times they joined forces to fight. Okay, I mean, there's other tribes over here, as you see. There's reasons, of course, why they got that. There's reasons, of course, why Shiloh was the place where the tabernacle was established, and so forth. Okay.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask a question? And maybe this is something you'll get to in a later lecture, but because I always thought the southern tribe of Israel was Binyamin and Yehuda, like the Judah. And so how could it have been that if Shimon was located in the south, because that would have essentially meant that they joined the northern tribe?
Benjamin and Judah were always Jerusalem. You'll see that all the way through the Talmud. Every time King David came from the tribe of Judah, and that's why he established himself in Jerusalem. Benjamin and Judah, it's always important to remember, those two tribes were always Jerusalem, to the extent that today, which we're not going to discuss in today's class, but the lost 10 tribes, everybody was lost besides the two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Why? Because they were in the city of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was the epic center of Judaism, because that's where the temple was. That's where the sacrifices were. That's where the kings hung out. That's where the priests would speak to the kings. This is where the people came to be Oila Regel, to come from different countries, to come to the temple in Jerusalem. So it was like the Brooklyn, the capital of the world. So that's why the two tribes that survived extinction was Judah and Benjamin. It's always important to associate them with the city of Jerusalem. It's important to also know, before we move on, that the tribe of Levite they were a tribe, but they did not have a land. They didn't get any portion of the land. They were like, think of them as like the nonprofit rabbis. Although today there are many nonprofit rabbis with some good pension plans. They're doing better than most businessmen. But in any case, the Levites of old, they had 48 cities all through the land of Israel. Different tribes had to give up particular cities. And that's where the Levites, the tribe of Levites, that's where they lived, in those 48 cities.
And
So
I
were they
understand.
lost too? No, so they weren't lost either, because the Levi, they weren't part of the 10
Yeah,
tribes.
were they lost?
Levites were not lost either, no. Because they were the people who were always studying Torah throughout, including the times in Egypt, and they were always also, they were the ones that were given the jobs in the temple itself. So they, like Judah and Benjamin, they were always very busy with Judaic, not just studies, but the culture and everything else. So they were not lost either. I'm sure some of them were lost, but not all of them. And that's how we have the Levites today. The Kohanim were part of that as well. The Kohanim also served in the temple, was the sacrifices and so forth. But when we talk about the 10 tribes, the 12 tribes, we don't include the Kohanim or the Levites because they weren't technically a tribe when we're discussing the map and the distribution of the land of Israel with the conquering of the land of Israel. They're more like the teachers, the professors, people that we look up to, but we don't, in this discussion, we're not calling them tribes like the way we're discussing here with Judah and Benjamin and Shimon and Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, Joshua, who came from the tribe of Ephraim, he's buried in that tribe, in that swath of land in Ephraim, probably near Shiloh somewhere, near the tabernacle. And that ends the book of Joshua.
Joshua was Moshe's student.
Yes, he was. That's my son who's on the class. Okay, let's go now. I'm sharing the screen. Okay, let's run through some of this quite quickly. Joshua dies in the year, let's just say 2520. Othniel is the first judge. There's a total of 12 judges. So after Joshua dies, and he gives his very beautiful speech in front of all the tribes, telling all the Jewish people to hold fast, don't give up their faith. There's going to be a lot of tough times in front of them. Please keep the Torah near and dear to them. So everyone loved Joshua. No one cared that he came from the tribe of Ephraim. He was the leader of all the Jewish people. But now, with the following 12 judges who are the leaders of the Jewish people, they were leaders of all the Jewish people, but clearly their tribe and the Jewish people of their tribe, wherever the judge lived, was obviously much closer to that tribe. So the judges did not have that power the way Joshua did. There's a few exceptions. There were some judges that had tremendous power of all the 12 tribes, but that leadership that Joshua carried like Moses did not continue after Joshua passes away. So Caleb ben Yefuneh, Caleb, basically, as we see, he got Judah, like I explained, and he conquers Hebron. There were 3 giants there. He wasn't concerned about them. But there was a small town called Devir. I'll show it to you in the map. So Caleb conquers Hebron. Debir is another town. And he tells Caleb is getting very old. Remember, he was already an elder guy during the times of Moses. And he tells basically anyone that captures this town of Devir and conquers it for me, I will give them my daughter. And indeed, that's what happened. So it was Othniel. Give me a second. So it was Othniel that captured the land of Devir. Give me a second. There it is. And that's why Othniel from the tribe of Judah becomes the first judge of the Jewish people. He's a tzaddik. Why would Caleb, who's a wise man, say anyone who conquers this land gets my daughter? Because Caleb knew the person that can conquer this very stronghold of the enemy in Devir, in that town, obviously is a tzaddik, obviously is a great person, and God will give him such a victory. So Othniel is the first judge, and he marries Caleb's daughter, whose name is Achsa. Othniel lives for 40 years. Ehud is another judge, which is mentioned in chapter 3, and he reigns for 80 years. When we say he reigns for 80 years, there was a lot of battle, there was a lot of fighting, and the book of Judges depicts it for us. Shamgar is the third judge. He only reigned for 1 year, and that's why you see there's no shade, no shady box there. Deborah is the fourth judge. This is the first time the book of Judges says that she's a judge and she's a prophetess. The first time we see that she's also a prophetess. She reigns for 40 years. It says by Deborah that she sat under a date palm tree of Deborah. And of course, all the commentators say, what's his business that she's sitting under a date palm tree and judging the people? So there's 2 reasons. One is Deborah, this tree is called Deborah because Deborah, who was Rebekah's nurse, died. It's discussed in Genesis. And it says Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died there. And she was buried there. So many years later, Deborah, the prophetess, is sitting under this Deborah tree because that's where the original Deborah died many years earlier. The other reason why it points out that Deborah is sitting under this palm tree, judging the Jewish people, is because she was a woman and she didn't want to be secluded with another man, because the laws of yichud, of a man and a woman who are not married, should not be in a closed, confined place together. You know, once upon a time when I was learning these laws, I thought it was very archaic. And let's get, come on, we're in the 20th century here, the 21st century. But with the hashtag Me Too movement and seeing the Hollywood greats acting like animals to upstanding citizens, it's not so far-fetched today where a boss who's a man or a boss who's a woman should not be in a closed, confined room. And even today, there are laws in public schools where a teacher who wants to reprimand a student, let's say in the principal's office and so forth, they have to leave the door open a little bit. So too with doctors, a doctor cannot come today, and whatever, even OBGYN, there has to be a nurse on site in the room. So Deborah as well, that's the point of what happened over there. Gidon is the fifth judge. If you have it in your handout sheet, Gidon is the fifth judge. Gidon is discussed in chapter 6 and 9. It's from chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9. He was a mighty, also very strong individual. And Gidon was so strong and he was loved by all the people that the Jewish people actually wanted him to become a king. This is the first time we see that the Jewish people wanted a king. And Gidon says, no kings amongst them. Kings are for the goyim, for the nations, the enemies. They have kings. But we have rabbis, we have judges, we have leaders, we have prophets. And he said no. But that's the first time we saw it. He has 70 children. I'm trying to see. Oh, he's from the tribe of Manasseh. Okay. Let me go back. Okay.
Who was Gidon?
Gidon was the fifth judge who comes from the tribe of Manasseh. He was very strong, very powerful. He was a good judge and leader of the Jewish people. He had 70 children from different wives, I presume. And one of his children was Avimelech. So there's Gidon over here. Mentioned there, you see in chapter 6 over there. This guy, Avimelech, is his son. He is not a judge. There was no judge after Gidon died. It was only his son Avimelech, but he was a wicked person. Avimelech basically told all the people of Shechem, where he was living, why should you have 70 people ruling over you? Gidon has 70 children. With nepotism, they're all going to be the next rulers and kings. Support me. I will kill all of my brothers, my 69 brothers, and I will become the next ruler and judge of the Jewish people. And they agreed. Gidon's youngest child, Avimelech's youngest sibling, his name was Yatom. We'll just finish the story with this. I'm going past my time. Yatom is a Jewish name. I only found out about it when I went to the Israeli consulate like a year and a half ago to get some paperwork for Israel. The person standing behind the window says his name is Yatom. Y-A-S-O-M, Yasom or Yatom. I said, Yatom, what kind of name is that? He says, I guess you don't know your prophets. I said, I do, I just don't know Yatom. So he was right. Gidon's youngest child was Yatom. Yatom escaped this massacre by his older brother Avimelech. He runs to the top of the hills of Shechem and he screams out to all the citizens of Shechem. And he says the following parable. There was a tree that wants a ruler over them. So the tree goes to, give me a second here. He goes to the grapes. This is what Yatom is telling to the thousands of citizens of Shechem. And this child, Yatom, says, I'm giving you a parable. The tree wants a ruler over them. So he goes to the grapes. He says, grapes, will you want to be a ruler over me, the tree? And the grapes said, no, the grapes, I am being saved for the wine libations for the temple. So the tree then goes to the figs. And the figs say, no, I don't want to be your ruler because I'm too busy waiting and savoring the moment when I'm going to give off sweet things and honey for the temple. And then the tree in this parable then goes to the olives. and says, olives, will you be my ruler and rule over me? And the olives say, no, I'm saving all the oil for the tabernacle, for the temple and for the menorah and for all the oil libations that we're going to do. And then the tree goes, this is all mentioned in the book of Judges. And then the tree goes to the thorn bush and says, thorn bush, will you be my ruler? And the thorn bush says, absolutely, and I'll take care of you. And Yatom says, fools, the thorn bush pricks with its thorns. It doesn't provide shade. It captures anything that crosses its path. And Yatom says to all the people of Shechem, of all the people you chose to be the ruler over you, you chose Avimelech, this wicked man. And basically, after some time, Yasom gets all the other people of Shechem to fight Avimelech. Avimelech does a lot of damage. As you see here, he reigned for 3 years. And eventually Avimelech is killed by a woman who throws this big millstone from a tower and kills Avimelech. So Gidon again was the 5th judge. Tola is the 6th judge. Yair is the 7th judge. Yephes is another judge. Ibtzan is another judge, which has a beautiful story. And in the next class, we will finish Ibtzan and Samson, of course, who the 12th and final judge. Samson, of course, we know has some beautiful story and history behind it and some laws, etc. So we'll begin our 3rd class with Ibtzan, which has to do with Ruth and Nomi and Boaz and so forth. And of course, we'll skip to Samson, who's the 12th and final judge. And that finishes our class today. And I take it up for questions because I like to finish by like around 8:20, give or take. But
Yeah.
anyone that wants to stick around for questions, I'm all yours.
One question I'm curious is, how are the judges different than the kings insofar as power is concerned? Because from what I can see, the judges had pretty much power. I know that I'm not quite understanding how they were different. I know the kings were not prophets, and some of the judges seem to be prophets, but I'm not really clear on the differences exactly.
Very good. The kings is a very sensitive topic for the Jewish people. And the first king we ever had was King Saul.
Right.
And he only reigned actually for 2.5 years, which people don't realize that. And then King David, of course, for 40 years, and then King Solomon, the third king, reigned for 41 years. The problem with the kings is that was the way of life of the non-Jews, of the nations around the world at that time. So the Jewish people basically were shunning and pushing themselves away from ever having a king. So that's why the prophets and the judges was a term that we use for being a spiritual guide and leader. Because when you think of a king has the power, the legal power to execute at will. It's not like today you have a constitution, you have a president, you have a Supreme Court. When you have a king, I'm not talking about a king like in England or a queen, but the places like in Africa, when you have a king, so the king has absolute power and might. This was not the Jewish way, because the Jewish way, we had a Sanhedrin, a court system of 71 judges, and we had smaller court systems of 23 judges. So kings was never our thing. So that's why we always had prophets. Even during the times of the judges, there were other prophets that were living at that time. But that was the way of the Jewish people.
But specifically,
After roughly, Alan, 400 years, give or take, of the Jewish
Right.
people living in the land of Israel, is when the king was anointed. And you should know, God was actually very upset.
Mhm.
He was very upset that the Jewish people wanted a king, and there was a lot of harm done to the Jewish people, including to King Saul himself. There was, after 400 years, God didn't resist it any longer, and it's hard to say that God capitulated, but that's basically what happened. So what's interesting is that even though God didn't want kings, we had beautiful kings, King Saul, King David,
Yeah,
and King
mhm.
Solomon.
Mhm.
But as we know later in the book of Kings, we shall see, which we'll get to in a few weeks, the kings did a lot of harm as well. Okay, anybody else? Lev, it's nice to see you with your earphones and joining the class. I'm happy that you're up and running. Jesse, how you doing? No questions from the wise Jesse?
None yet.
Feel free to email me, guys, not a problem. I can't thank you all enough for, again, joining the class today. It means the world to me, and of course, the world to our Jewish brethren. And even though we know a lot of this stuff, it's important to refresh ourselves that Israel should be, it's not like some foreign Mount, like, Mount Sinai, the 10 plagues, once a year we discuss the 10 plagues. It seems like it's more like a movie, a Hollywood movie. But the more we discuss this, the more we know about our Jewish leaders and our history, the better it'll be. And thank you, Vivian, as well. And God bless you all. You have my email. We'll see
Can
you
I
guys
ask,
again. Yeah,
can
you
I
have a
ask
question? Go ahead.
question?
Yeah, who's
Yeah,
asking?
how
I
can
can't, I can't
listen
see.
to- How can how can I listen to the first class again and the beginning of this one?
Yes, email me. It's already on YouTube, and this class will also be on YouTube in an hour from now.
Okay, thank
But
you.
email me, you'll get it right away, Sarah.
And it's
Right.
also on Facebook.
Also, what?
Right. It's also on Facebook. So once you stream to Facebook, it's already stored there live. So you can also find High Center or Mendel Schwartz, and you can see what he previously broadcast, or Rabbi Schwartz broadcast live. So it's there too.
Thank you.
Guys, love you all. Speak to you later, alligators.